Hello everyone, welcome to this full-length sample practice test for your PRINCE2 Foundation exam. So as a part of this video, we would be solving one full-length PRINCE2 7th edition Foundation Mock Exam. Now that means that I will be walking you through the entire set of 60 questions that you will be expected to solve in your PRINCE2 Foundation exam. And as a part of this video, I'll also discuss the detailed answers and explanations for each one of those questions. Now, a few pointers before we get started, right? And this is really to ensure that you get the maximum benefit out of this session. Firstly, for each question, please pause the video as soon as the question is displayed on screen and try to solve it yourself first before we discuss the correct and the incorrect answer choices. So that way you learn actively and not passively, right? Secondly, it's better to have a pen and a paper ready with you whilst you are working on the questions, just in case you need to pen down some thoughts, reflections, or learnings. And finally, number 3, the pass marks for the PRINCE2 Foundation exam is 60%, right? So out of these 60 questions, your target should be to get at least 36 questions correct. So make sure you keep a tally of that whilst you are solving the questions. So let's get ready. I wish you all the best and let's get started.
Right, so question number 1, please pause the video and try to solve the question. So this is a straight out of the gate question with the fundamentals around PRINCE2, right? So the question is simply asking how many principles PRINCE2 7th edition defines. And the correct answer, of course, is option C, because the PRINCE2 7th edition defines exactly 7 principles, which are ensuring continued business justification, learning from experience, define roles, responsibilities, and relationships, manage by stages, manage by exception, focus on products, and tailor to suit the project, right? There is a YouTube video on my channel that breaks down these entire concept behind the 7 principles. So I would recommend that you watch that video as well at any point in time when you want a bit of a revision of the 7 principles of PRINCE2. So the correct answer is option C. Right, so the next question, and here we are testing whether you understand the basic difference between a project and business as usual, okay? Now note the question asks what distinguishes a project, okay? So option A says projects are ongoing and repeatable. Well, that doesn't make sense at all, okay? That is describing business as usual and not a project. So we can eliminate option A. Option C says projects focus on managing operational processes. Again, this is describing business as usual. So option C is incorrect as well. Option D says projects always require external resources. Now, it might seem logical on the surface, but PRINCE2 does not define this as a characteristic of a project. So projects can use entirely internal resources or entirely external resources depending on the complexity and the ecosystem. So option D is incorrect as well. So option B says projects are temporary endeavors with a defined beginning and end. Now this looks like a great option to me because a project is indeed a temporary endeavor in nature, okay? It has defined start, defined end, and delivers specific products. And this is exactly what sets it apart from ongoing operations or business as usual. So the correct answer is option B. Right, so question number 3, and this tests your understanding of the principles and what each one actually does. Now, the keyword in this question is divided into manageable sections with clear decision points. So option A says focus on products. Now it might seem related, but this principle is about defining and delivering products, okay? It does not specifically relate to dividing the projects in stages. So option A is incorrect. Let's look at option B, which says manage by exception. This is about setting tolerances and escalating only when they are breached, right? So that does not gel quite well with dividing the projects into sections. So that's an incorrect option as well. Let's look at option D, which is to tailor to suit the project. Now this is about adapting PRINCE2 to the project context. It does not specifically relate to the management stages. So option D is incorrect as well. So the correct answer to this question is option C, which says manage by stages. And this is exactly what PRINCE2 expects when it talks about dividing a project into manageable sections. So the project is broken into manageable stages, each with a formal decision point at the end. So you can think of it as a series of go or no-go gates throughout the project. So the correct answer is option C. So the next question, and this is a role accountability question. Now note that the question asks for the primary accountability of the project executive. So option A says managing the day-to-day running of the project. Now, if you think about it, that is a project manager's job, right? Not a project executive's responsibility, because the executive operates at a much higher level. So option A is incorrect. Let's look at option B, which says ensuring the technical integrity of the products. Now, this sounds like something the senior supplier would do, right? Not the executive. So option B is incorrect as well. Option D says representing the supplier interests. Again, this is the role of the senior supplier, not the executive. So option D is incorrect as well. So the correct answer is option C, which says being accountable for the project and ensuring it remains worth the investment. And the project executive is the single accountable owner of the business case. And this is what you need to understand from the overall role and accountability standpoint of the project executive. Because in other terminology, the executive is also called the project sponsor. And the buck of the project stops with the project sponsor. So the correct answer is option C. Okay, question number 5. And this question tests your understanding of a key PRINCE2 term, which is output. Okay, so option A describes the result of a change in a real world behavior. Okay, now that is the definition of an outcome. Okay, not an output. So option A is incorrect. Now option B says the measurable improvement resulting from an outcome. Well, that is the definition of a benefit. Okay, so we can eliminate option B as well. Let's look at option D, which says an agreed set of work formally assigned to a team manager. Now that is describing a work package, okay, not a output. And it has no linkage whatsoever to the definition of an output. So option D is incorrect. So the correct answer to this question is option C, which says a tangible or intangible deliverable produced by an activity. Now this looks like a good option to me, and an output is actually what a team produces. It could be a software module, a training program, a constructed building, etc., etc. The output exists regardless of whether anyone uses it in the end. Okay, because the job of a project is to generate an output. Now we really want that someone uses that output as the project benefits realization, but in terms of the definition of an output, the definition of an output goes as option C, which is a tangible or intangible deliverable produced by an activity. Right, so question number 6, and here we are looking at the purpose of the business case practice. Now note the question is asking about the practice's purpose, not just what the business case document does, right? So option A says to define the products to be delivered. Now that is the purpose of the plans practice, okay, not the business case practice of PRINCE2. So option A is incorrect. Option C says to describe quality standards. Now that is the purpose of quality practice. It has no linkage to the business case practice. So option C is incorrect as well. Option D says to identify and manage risks. Now that is the purpose of the risk practice. So option D is incorrect as well. So the correct answer is option B, which says to establish mechanisms to judge whether the project remains desirable, viable, and achievable. So this looks like a good option because the business case practice gives the project board the means to continuously assess whether the project is still worth investing in, right? And that assessment happens throughout the entire life cycle of the project. So the correct answer is option B. Right, so question number 7, and now we are looking at the purpose of the plans practice. So let's look at option A, which says to identify and manage events that may impact project objectives. Now that is describing the risk practice. So that is why option A is incorrect. Option B says to ensure the project team is structured and accountable. Now that sounds more like the organization practice, right? It really does not gel quite well with the plans practice. So option B is incorrect. Let's look at option D, which says to monitor and review the realization of the project's benefits. Now that sits more with the business case practice, and that is why option D is incorrect as well. So option C says to facilitate communication and control by defining what will be delivered and how. This is exactly what PRINCE2 manual also says, right? Because the plans practice defines the what, the who, how, when, and how much. Plans are the backbone of project control and not just mere project documents or artifacts, right? So the correct answer to this question is option C. Right, so question number 8, and this is testing your knowledge on one of the most important principles of PRINCE2. The keywords here are act within defined boundaries and only escalate when there is a forecast of the boundaries to be exceeded. So option A says learn from experience. Now this principle is about capturing and applying the lessons throughout the project, and it has nothing to do with the delegation and exception management. So option A is incorrect. Option C says tailor to suit the project. Now this is about adapting the method to fit the project context. It does not relate to the tolerances and escalation. So option C is incorrect. Let's look at option D, which says manage by stages. Now this is about dividing the project into stages with decision points, not about tolerance management. So option D is incorrect as well. Now option B says manage by exception. And this is the correct answer choice. Tolerances are set at each management level in PRINCE2. The manager below only escalates when those tolerances are forecast to be breached. Okay, and that is exactly how PRINCE2 empowers the project manager without burdening the project board with daily decisions. So the correct answer is option B. Okay, so question number 9, and do not confuse the project brief with the project initiation documentation or the business case. Okay, they are all different management products with very different purposes. So option A says to document the business justification. Now that is the purpose of the business case, right? Not the project brief. So option A is incorrect. Option B says to authorize the project manager to proceed with initiation. Now that might seem true on the surface, but the project brief enables the project board to decide whether to authorize initiation, right? The brief itself does not authorize the project. So option B is incorrect. Option D says to record detailed plans for delivering products. Now that is the purpose of the stage plan and project plan. It has no linkage to the project brief, so we can eliminate option D straight away. Now option C says to provide a full and firm foundation for initiating the project. Now this looks like the correct option to me, and this is exactly what PRINCE2 says the project brief is for. It gives enough information to decide whether to proceed with the full initiation of the project. So the correct answer is option C. Right, so question number 10, and here we have a basic roles question, and this question is asking who chairs the project board. So let's go through the options one by one. Option A says the senior user. Now the senior user is an important member of the project board representing those who will use the products, right? But chairing the board is not their role, okay? So we can eliminate option A. Option B says the project manager. Now, if you think about it, the project manager is not even a member of the project board, right? The project manager attends board meetings, but does not chair them. So option B is incorrect. Option C says the senior supplier. Now, similar to the senior user, the senior supplier sits on the board, but does not chair it, right? So option C is incorrect as well. Now option D says the project executive, and this is the correct answer, and the project executive chairs the project board and is ultimately accountable for the project. Think of it as a CEO equivalent for a project. Okay, so the correct answer is option D.
Let's take a pause here, and before we move on to question 11, if you are liking the session, please press the like button and subscribe to this channel. That will really help me to understand that you value such educational content on YouTube, and then I can create more videos like these for you for your PRINCE2 exam preparation. If you think about it, it really costs nothing to subscribe. So thank you for your support, and now let's move on to question number 11.
Right, so question number 11, and this question is testing your knowledge of management products and their specific purposes. Now note the keyword proposals to change the project baseline, okay, and that is your anchor text for the question stem. Now option B says risk management approach. The risk management approach describes how to manage threats and opportunities, but not how to handle the changes proposal. So option B is incorrect. Let's look at option C, which says quality management approach. Now this describes quality standards and quality control activities. It has no direct linkage to the change proposals or baseline management. An incorrect answer choice. Option D says the issue management approach. However, please note that issues may not include change requests all the time, okay? But going back to the scenario in this question, the specific document that describes how to record and approve changes to the baseline is the change management approach, okay? Not the issue management approach. So option D is quite close, but it's not precise enough what the question is asking. Okay, so option D is also incorrect. So the correct answer to this question is option A, which says the change management approach. Because the change management approach specifically defines how changes to the agreed baseline are controlled, recorded, and approved throughout the project. So the correct answer is option A. Right, so question number 12, and here we have a technique question. Now the business case management technique has 4 steps: develop, check, maintain, and confirm. The question is asking where the project manager assesses the impact of risks and issues on the business justification. So option A says develop. Now during the develop step, the initial outline business case is created from the project mandate. It is not where risks and issues are assessed. So option A is incorrect. Option C says maintain. Now during maintain, the project manager updates the business case with the actual progress data such as costs incurred and benefits realized. Now that is quite different from assessing risks and issues. So option C is incorrect as well. Option D says confirm. Now this step happens after the project closes, when the business reviews whether benefits have been realized in practice or not. So that is why option D doesn't fit. So it is an incorrect answer choice. Now option B says check, and this is the correct answer choice to this question. Because during the check step, the project manager reviews the business case at key points to assess how identified risks and issues impact the business justification. And this is what keeps the business case current and not just a document which is written at the start of the project and everyone forgets about it, right? So the correct answer is option B. Right, so question number 13, and this is an important governance question. Now the exception plan is created when stage tolerances are forecast to be exceeded or breached, right? So the question is asking who needs to approve it. Option A says the project manager. Now, if you think about it, an exception plan is produced precisely because things have gone beyond the project manager's authority, right? So the project manager cannot approve their own exception plan, okay? So that is why we can eliminate option A. Option B says team manager. Now the team manager operates at the delivery level and they have no authority to approve an exception plan. So option B is incorrect as well. Option D says project assurance. And now project assurance monitors the project on behalf of the project board, and it does not have approval authority over exception plans according to PRINCE2. So option D is incorrect. Now option C says the project board, and this is what exactly PRINCE2 expects, right? First, the project manager raises an exception report to the project board reviews it, and if it decides to continue, directs the project manager to produce an exception plan, and then the board formally reviews and approves the exception plan. So the correct answer is option C. Question number 14, and here we have a definition question. Now PRINCE2 has very specific definitions for risks and issues, and they are not interchangeable, okay? So please be very, very clear about them. Option B says an event relevant to the project that has occurred and requires management consideration. Now that is the definition of an issue, not a risk according to PRINCE2, because issues have already happened or to be happening in the near future, right? So option B is incorrect. Option C says a forecast that there will be a deviation beyond the agreed tolerances. Now that is the definition of an exception in PRINCE2, okay, not the definition of a risk. So we can eliminate option C. Option D says description of the possible impact of an uncertain event. Now that sounds like a risk impact statement, okay, not the full definition of a risk itself. So option D is incorrect as well. Option A says an uncertain event that, should it occur, will have an effect on achievement of objectives of the project. Now this looks like the correct option to me because a risk is uncertain. It may happen or may not happen. Now if it does happen, it impacts the objectives. And please note that risks, if it comes in a positive way affecting the benefits of a project, can be called out as opportunities as well. Okay, so the correct answer is option A. Right, so question number 15, and this is a management product question. So the question is asking which document gives the team manager the formal authorization to deliver a set of products. Now think about it as the flow of authority in PRINCE2. Now option A says stage plan. Now the stage plan defines all the works for the stage at a higher level. Okay, it is not the document that specifically authorizes the team manager to carry out the work, because the stage plan is an alignment between the project board and the project manager. Okay, so option A is incorrect. Option B says project initiation documentation, because the PID is the overall baseline document for the project, right? Probably you know this by now. However, it does not authorize the team managers directly. Very, very important. So that is why option B is also incorrect. Option D says product description. Now a product description defines a product's purpose, composition, and quality specifications. It does not authorize the team manager to start the work. So option D is incorrect. Now option C says work package, and this is the correct answer choice. The work package is the formal means by which the project manager delegates delivery of a set of products to the team manager. Think of it as the contract between the project manager and the team for that particular piece of work. So the correct answer is option C. Right, so let's move on to question number 16. And here we are testing your knowledge of quality related management products. Now note the question says records planned and actual quality activities and results. Now that phrasing is your clue to the correct answer choice. Option A says product register. Now the product register records the status of all the products in a project. It does not specifically records about quality activities and results. So option A is incorrect. Option C says quality management approach. Now the quality management approach defines the strategy for quality. It defines what will be done, not what has to be done, right? So option C is incorrect as well. Now option D says project product description. Now this describes the overall project product and its quality specifications. It does not record actual quality activity results, okay? So we can eliminate option D as well. So option B says quality register, and this is the correct answer choice. The quality register is the live log of planned and completed quality activities on the project. It is the audit trail for quality control, and in any audit, this is one of the first documents a reviewer will ask for. So the correct answer is option B. Next, question number 17. What is the purpose of highlight report in PRINCE2? Now, do not mix up the different reports which PRINCE2 mandates as part of the overall life cycle of a project, because each one goes to a different audience and serves a different purpose. Now option A says to report to the product manager on the status of a work package. Now that is the purpose of a checkpoint report. The checkpoint report flows from the team manager up to the project manager. So option A is incorrect. Option C says to inform the project board about a forecast breach of tolerance. Now that is the purpose of an exception report. Alarm bells should start ringing in your mind if you think the highlight report deals with tolerance breaches, okay, because it doesn't. So option C is incorrect. Option D says to provide a formal record of lessons identified. Now that is the purpose of a lessons report. So we can eliminate option D as well. Now option B says to provide the project board with a summary of stage status at defined intervals. Now this looks like the correct answer choice to me because the highlight report is the periodic update from the project manager to the project board. It keeps the board informed without pulling them into the daily management of projects. So the correct answer is option B. Next, question number 18, and this is a knowledge question about the 7 performance targets in the PRINCE2 7th edition. Now note that sustainability is a new and important addition to the PRINCE2 7th edition when compared to the PRINCE2 6th edition. Now, if you have studied the PRINCE2 manual already, you would be knowing that the correct answer to this question is option A, which is time, cost, quality, scope, benefits, risk, and sustainability being the 7 performance targets for the PRINCE2 way of project management as per the PRINCE2 7th edition framework. So the correct answer to this question is option A. Next, question number 19. What is the PRINCE2 definition of an issue? So here we are back to the definitions, and this time the question is asking about issues. Now do not confuse this with risks, right? A risk is uncertain, however, an issue is not. So option A says an uncertain event that may have a positive or a negative impact. Now that is close to the definition of a risk, right? Because the keyword is uncertain. An issue has already happened or is very certain to occur. So option A is incorrect. Option C says a forecast deviation beyond agreed tolerance levels. Now that is the definition of an exception. So we can eliminate option C straight away. Option D says a formally authorized change to the project baseline. Now that is the definition of an approved change, not the definition of an issue. So option D is incorrect as well. Now option B says an event relevant to the project that has occurred and requires management consideration. And this is the correct answer choice. An issue has already occurred or is certain to happen, right? It requires the project manager to take action and requires management consideration. Okay, and that is what separates it from a risk. So the correct answer is option B. Next, question number 20, and here we are looking at the lessons log. Now do not confuse the lessons log with the lessons report. Okay, they are different management products used at different times. Option A says to record quality activities and results. Now that is the purpose of the quality register. It has no linkage to the lessons. So we can eliminate option A. Option B says to document formal lessons applied from previous projects. Now it might seem true on the surface, but the lessons log records lessons identified during the current project. Lessons from the previous project are an input at the start and they are not recorded in the log. Okay, so option B is quite close, but it is an incorrect answer choice because it's not precise enough to what the question is asking. Option D says to record the status of all the products. Now that is the purpose of the product register. Okay, so option D is incorrect as well. Now option C says to capture and record lessons identified during the project for future use. Now this is the correct answer choice because the lessons log is a live document maintained throughout the project, and at the end of the project it feeds into the lessons report, which is shared more widely. So the correct answer is option C. Next, question number 21. How many processes does the PRINCE2 7th edition define? This should be very basic, guys, and I hope all of you have got this answer correct because the correct answer is option C, which says 7, because the PRINCE2 7th edition defines exactly 7 processes: starting up a project, initiating a project, directing a project, controlling a stage, managing product delivery, managing a stage boundary, and closing a project. I have an entire video on this YouTube channel which talks in detail about each of these 7 processes, so I would encourage you to watch that video as well. So the correct answer is option C. Next, what is the purpose of the starting up a project process in PRINCE2? Now here we are on the processes part of the PRINCE2 7th edition, and this question asks about the very first process of PRINCE2, which is starting up a project. So option A says to establish detailed plans and controls. Now that sounds like more of initiating a project process, right? Because starting up is a quite lightweight process because it's pre-initiation. So option A is incorrect. Option C says to authorize the project manager to manage the project. Now this is what happens in directing a project, right? When a project board authorizes the initiation stage. So option C is incorrect as well. Option D says to formally close the project and release the resources. Well, that doesn't make sense at all, right? Because that is the closing a project process. So we can eliminate option D straight away. Option B says to ensure the project is viable and worthwhile before committing to full initiation. And this looks like the correct answer choice because starting up exists to prevent poorly conceived projects from progressing. It is a light touch check before committing significant resources to the full initiation stage of the project. Think of starting off a project as the litmus check or the most fundamental check of genesis of a project before even the project moved into initiation. Okay, so the correct answer is option B. So question number 23, and this is a fairly straightforward principal identification question. And the key phrase here is to seek out and apply lessons from previous projects. And that phrase is your anchor. So option A says focus on products. This principle is about planning and delivering by defining products before activities. Okay, it does not specifically relate to learning from past experience. So option A is incorrect. Option B says tailor to suit the project. This is about adapting the PRINCE2 method to the context and scale of the project, not about lessons or experience. So we can eliminate option B. Option D says define roles, responsibilities, and relationships. This principle is about establishing clear accountability in the project management team. It does not at all relate to the lessons or experience. So option D is incorrect. So option C says learn from experience, and obviously this is the correct answer choice. This principle requires the project team to actively seek lessons at the start of the project, record new lessons as they arise, and pass them on in the end of the project. And this applies to the current project and helps the future projects as well. So the correct answer is option C. Next, question number 24, accountability for the business case, and it is a classic exam topic for PRINCE2. So let's go through the options one by one. Option A says the project manager. Now the project manager updates and maintains the business case, but they are not ultimately accountable for it. Okay, very, very important because the accountability sits quite high up than the project manager. So option A is incorrect. Option B says the senior user. Now the senior user represents the interests of those who will use the products. While benefits matter to the senior user for sure, the ultimate accountability for the business case belongs elsewhere. So option B is also incorrect. Option D says project assurance. Now project assurance monitors the project on behalf of the project board. It does not own the business case. So we can eliminate option D. Option C says the project executive, and this is the correct answer choice. The executive is the single accountable owner of the project and therefore owns the business case. Think of it this way, the executive is the one who has to answer the organization if the investment fails to deliver value. Okay, so the buck of the project stops with the project executive. So the correct answer is option C. Question number 25, again, a definition based question. What is the definition of a benefit in PRINCE2? Now option A says tangible or intangible deliverable produced by the project. Okay, now that is the definition of an output. So it's an incorrect answer choice. Option B says that the result of the change that affects real world behavior, and that is the definition of an outcome. So we can eliminate option B as well. Option D says a statement of how the project will address the business need. Now that sounds more like the purpose of a business case, okay, not the definition of a benefit. So option D is incorrect as well. Option C mentions that it is the measurable improvement resulting from an outcome perceived as positive. And this looks like the correct answer choice because a benefit comes after the outcome, and of course, it must be measurable, right? So for example, a new IT system, which could be the output, changes how staff of a team actually works, which is the outcome, and the results is cost savings, which is the benefit, and it can be measured in pound or dollar terms, right? And that is the entire chain of thought. So the correct answer is option C. Question number 26, and here we have a purpose question on the closing a project process. And this is the final process in PRINCE2. Option A says to review whether the project delivered the products in its stage plan. Now that might seem logical, but this is more of a stage closure activity. Okay, closing a project is about the whole project, not just the last stage plan. So option A is not precise enough, and that is why it's a very close answer choice, but it's an incorrect answer choice. Option C says to plan the next stage for project board approval. Well, that doesn't make sense at all, right? For closing a project process, right? Because that sounds like managing a stage boundary. Okay, so we can eliminate option C. Option D says update the project initiation documentation or the PID. Now the PID is the baseline document. Okay, updating it is not the purpose of closing a project process. So option D is incorrect. Option B says to provide a fixed point at which acceptance of the project product is confirmed and the project is formally closed. Now this looks like a good option to me, okay, and this is the correct answer choice indeed, because closing a project ensures products are accepted, lessons are captured, and the project board formally disbands the team and releases the resources. So the correct answer is option B. Next, what is the purpose of the project mandate in PRINCE2? Because the project mandate is the starting point for any PRINCE2 project, and the question is asking about its purpose. Okay, so let's look at the options one by one. Option A says to define detailed project management controls. Now that is the purpose of the project initiation documentation, or the PID, okay, not the mandate. Because the mandate, if you think about it, is a very early high-level document. So option A is incorrect. Option C says to formally document the business justification. Now that is the purpose of the business case. The mandate triggers the project, the business case justifies it. Okay, they are quite different. So option C is incorrect. Option D says to authorize the project manager to start the project. Now that authorization comes later from the project board. Okay, the mandate does not authorize anything at all. So we can eliminate option D. Option B says to provide the initial trigger for the project from the commissioning organization, and that is the correct answer choice, because the mandate is what starts the whole process of project off from the ground, right? It comes from a responsible authority and triggers the starting up a project process. Okay, so the correct answer is option B. Next, question number 28, and this is a reports question, and it's asking the purpose of a checkpoint report. So let's look at the options one by one. Option A says to report stage status to the project board at regular intervals. Now that is highlight report. Okay, the project manager sends the highlight report to the project board. Okay, this is not the checkpoint report. So option A is incorrect. Option B says to provide an end of stage summary for the project board, and that is like the end stage report. Okay, not the checkpoint report. Again an incorrect referencing of the report. So option B is incorrect. Option D says to notify the project board of a forecasted breach of tolerance. We have done this a few times already as per the previous questions. That is the exception report, right? So option D is incorrect. Now option C says to report the status of a work package to the project manager, and that is the correct answer choice, because the checkpoint report flows from the team manager up to the project manager. It covers work package progress, products completed, and any concerns arising. So the project manager stays informed without micromanaging the team, whereas the team manager actually manages the teams and delivers the products. So the correct answer is option C. Next, question number 29, and here we are on the risk register. Now the question is asking the purpose of the risk register. Okay, note that it is not asking the purpose of the risk management approach. Very different things. Okay, so let's look at the options. Option A says to record all issues and concerns raised by stakeholders. Now that would be issue register, not the risk register. So option A is incorrect. Option B says to document the strategy for how risks will be managed. Now that is the purpose of the risk management approach. As I was discussing, the approach defines the strategy, the register records the individual risks. Very important for you to understand. So option B is incorrect. Option D says to authorize the project manager to implement risk responses. Now risk register do not authorize anything. Okay, they record information. So we can eliminate option D as well. Option C says to provide a record of all identifiable risks, their assessments and their status. Now this looks like the correct answer choice, and it is the correct answer choice indeed for this question, because the risk register is the live document that captures each identified risk, its probability, impact and the agreed responses, and it's updated and kept live throughout the project. So the correct answer is option C. Next, question number 30. What is the function of project assurance in PRINCE2? Let's look at the options one by one. Option A says to manage day-to-day progress on behalf of the project manager. Now that does not make sense at all, okay? Because the project manager manages day-to-day progress. Project assurance does not report to the project manager. It's a conflict of interest. So option A is incorrect. Option B says to provide administrative support, and that is the role of a project support, not project assurance. Again, an incorrect answer choice. Option D says to formally approve changes to the project baseline. Now, this is a project board responsibility, because project assurance does not have approval authority. Okay, it has a review or a consultation authority, not approval authority. Okay, very, very important. So we can eliminate option D. Now option C says to independently monitor and assure the project on behalf of the project board. This is actually review and consultation that we were discussing, and this is the correct answer choice, because project assurance gives the project board confidence that the project is being managed properly without the project board having to get involved in every detail of the project. Okay, and that is the sort of delegated authority which the project board gives to the project assurance team. So the correct answer is option C.
Right, so we are already halfway through. I hope you are finding the session valuable. Now, before we move on to question number 31, if you wish to practice more high quality curated PRINCE2 mock questions like these ones for your foundation exam preparation, you can check out my official mock exam question bank. So this online course has a set of 4 full-length practice PRINCE2 Foundation Exam questions along with detailed answers and explanations. Also, as part of the cohort, you would be getting access to some additional study materials. All the links will be provided in the description section of the video, and I have kept the prices very, very affordable. And now let's move on to question number 31.
Right, next, question number 31. What should the project manager do when stage tolerances are forecast to be breached? Okay, now the key phrase of this question stem is forecast to be breached. Okay, note that it has not actually breached the tolerances. Very, very important, because that will be your trigger phase to select the right answer choice. Option A says to revise the stage plan and continue without escalating. Now, really think about it. The project manager does not have authority to revise the plan unilaterally once tolerances are going to be breached. Okay, that authority lies with the project board. So we can eliminate option A. Option C says to inform the senior user and request resources. Now, the senior user does not have the authority to resolve stage tolerance breaches at this level. Okay, so this does not gel well with the scenario. Okay, so option C is incorrect. Let's look at option D, which says to close the stage early and submit a end stage report. Now, that is not how PRINCE2 handles exception situations, right? Because closing the stage is not the right immediate response when there is a event where it's been forecasted that the stage tolerances will be exceeded. So option D is an incorrect answer choice. Now option B says raise an exception report to the project board, and this is exactly what PRINCE2 expects. The project manager raises the exception report, the board reviews it, takes a decision, and may direct the production of an exception plan which the project manager writes, and then the exception plan is reviewed and finally approved by the project board. Okay, and that is managing by exception in action within a PRINCE2 project. So the correct answer is option B. Next, question number 32, and this is a technique question on the planning process of PRINCE2. Now, PRINCE2 uses product-based planning, as you might know already, and the question is asking about the first step specifically. Now option B says preparing estimates. Now estimating comes after you have defined what you are delivering and the activities involved. you cannot estimate without first knowing what you are producing, right? So option B is incorrect. Now option C says identifying dependencies. Okay. Now dependencies are identified later in the planning process once the products and activities are known. So option C is incorrect as well. Option D says preparing a schedule. A schedule is produced towards the end of the planning process. You need to know the activities, the estimates, the dependencies before you can build a schedule, right? So we can eliminate option D as well. Now option A says defining and analyzing the products to be delivered, and this is the correct answer choice. PRINCE2 puts product definition first. You define what you are making before you plan how to make it, okay? And this is exactly what makes planning within PRINCE2 very, very different from activity first approaches in the project management body of knowledge or other project management frameworks, okay? So coming back to it, the correct answer to this question is option A. Next question, which management product is prepared during the managing a stage boundary process to summarize the performance of the current stage? Option A says highlight report. Now the highlight report is produced regularly during a stage to update the project board on the project progress. Okay, it is not specific to stage closure. So option A is incorrect. Option B says checkpoint report. Now we have done this already as part of this exercise. Checkpoint report is produced by the team manager and sent to the project manager during the stage. It is not a stage boundary product. So option B is incorrect. Option D says exception report. An exception report, as we have already learned, is produced when tolerances are forecast to be breached. It is not a stage performance summary at closure. So option D is incorrect as well. So the correct answer to this question is option C, which says end stage report, because the end stage report is prepared by the project manager during managing a stage boundary process. It tells the project board what has happened during the stage, including what was delivered, what was not, and how performance compared to the plan of that stage. Okay, so the correct answer is option C. Next, question number 34, and this is a role accountability question again. So let's be precise about what the senior user actually does. Option A says providing financial resources and budget. That is primarily the responsibility of the project executive and the business. The senior user represents the users, okay, not the budget holder of the project. So option A is incorrect. Option C says ensuring technical integrity of the products delivered by the suppliers. Now that is the accountability of the senior supplier. The supplier representative, which is the senior supplier, cares about how things are built and whether they meet the technical specifications. So option C is incorrect. Option D says managing day-to-day project work on behalf of the project board. Now that is incorrect as well, because that is what the project manager does, right? The board does not manage day-to-day delivery. Okay, so we can eliminate option D. Option B says ensuring the project delivers products that meets user needs and enable benefits realization. Now we are talking, right? And this is the correct answer choice. The senior user represents the people who will use those products, okay? And they are accountable for ensuring that the products delivered as part of the project are fit for purpose after the project is delivered. So the correct answer is option B. Next, question number 35. This is a technique question. The quality management technique has 4 steps, which are gathering user inputs, describing the quality management approach, controlling quality, and accepting products. Now the question is asking where formal user acceptance actually takes place. Now option A says gathering user inputs. Now this is where users' quality expectations and acceptance criteria are captured, right? It comes at the start of quality planning, not where acceptance happens. So option A is incorrect. Option B says describing the quality management approach, and this is where the project documents its quality strategy. Okay, it does not involve formal acceptance. So option B is incorrect as well. Option C says controlling quality, and this is where quality reviews and testings happen. It's part of the process that leads to acceptance, but the formal acceptance is a separate and specific step, which takes us to the correct answer to this question, which is option D, which is accepting products. And this is exactly where the user confirms the product meets their expectations and formally accepts it. Think of it as the handover moment for any project. Okay, the team delivers, the user accepts. So the correct answer is Option D. Next, let's move on. This is a question about the exception management process flow. Now let's look at the answer options one by one. Option A says request from senior user to revise the scope of the project. Now scope changes go through the change management process, right? Now any scope change do not automatically trigger exception management, okay? So this does not fit well with the overall question stem. So option A is incorrect. Option C says request from team manager. Now the team manager operates at the delivery level and raises issues to the project manager. Team managers do not trigger exception plans, plain and simple. So option C is incorrect. Option D says unilateral decision by the project manager. Now the project manager raises an exception report, but the exception plan is not triggered by the project manager's decision. Very, very important. The board looks at the exception plan and takes a decision whether they would want the project manager to write an exception report based on that exception plan. Okay, very important for you to understand. So option D is incorrect. So the correct answer to this question is option B, which says a project board direction following its review of an exception report. Now, as we have discussed previously in one of the questions as well, the sequence is first an exception report is raised by the project manager, the project board reviews it, then the board directs production of an exception plan. Okay, the board is in control at every step during managed by exception principle. So the correct answer is option B. Next, question number 37, and here we again have a principal question, but it is a bit slightly at a deeper level. The question is asking what the focus on products principle primarily promotes. Option A says clear accountability for delivery. Now, accountability is more closely aligned with the defined roles, responsibilities, and relationships principle, right? So option A is not the best fit here. Option C says continuous review of the business case. Now that is the ensuring continuous business justification principle, okay? Not the focus on products principle. So option C is incorrect. Option D says efficient use of resources. Now this might seem reasonable, but the focus on products principle is not primarily about resource efficiency. Okay, so option D is also incorrect. Now option B says shared understanding of what the project will deliver before work is planned, and this is the correct answer choice. The focus on products principle is about defining products upfront. It avoids scope creep and ensures everyone knows what success actually looks like before a single activity starts. Okay, so the what is agreed before the how is planned. Okay, very, very important. So the correct answer is option B. Let's move on. Question number 38, and the question is on issue management. Now, the issue management technique in PRINCE2 has 4 steps: capturing, assessing, deciding, and implementing. Okay, now the question asks where the impact is first assessed. Okay, let's look at the options. Option A says capturing issues. Now, capturing is about logging the issue, right? So you document it, give it an ID, and assign it. But you have not yet assessed the impact at this stage. So option A is incorrect. Option C says deciding on changes. Now deciding comes after assessment, right? First you understand the impact and then you make a decision. You cannot decide without assessing an issue first, right? It's common sense. So option C is incorrect. Let's look at option D, which says implementing changes. Now implementation comes last, right? This is well beyond the assessment stage. So we can eliminate option D as well. So the correct answer is option B, which says assessing issues. Because during the assessment step, the project manager evaluates the impact of the issue on the project, including its effect on scope, cost, time, risk, resources, etc., etc. Okay. Only after this assessment has happened can an informed decision be made. Okay, so the correct answer is option B. Let's move on. Question number 39. Which of the following is a key objective of the controlling a stage process in PRINCE2? Okay, now here we have an objectives question on the controlling a stage process. So this is the core day-to-day management process for the project manager used throughout each stage. Now option A says to prepare the project for the next stage. Now that is the managing a stage boundary process, right? Controlling a stage is about what happens during a stage, not at the end of it. So option A is incorrect. Option C says to provide the project board with authority to proceed. Now that is directing a project process, specifically when the board authorizes each stage. So option C is incorrect. Option D says to complete the project in a controlled manner and release the resources. Now that is the closing a project process, so we can eliminate option D as well. Now option B says to ensure there are no uncontrolled changes to the products agreed by the project board. Now this is the correct answer choice because controlling a stage is about managing work, monitoring progress, and maintaining control over scope and products. Change control is absolutely central to this entire process. Okay, so the correct answer is option B. Next, question number 40. What is the purpose of directing a project process in PRINCE2? Okay, so let's look at the options one by one. Option A says to manage the work of a stage by authorizing work packages and implementing corrective actions. Now that is the controlling a stage process, right? So we did solve a question on this theme just before this question. Okay, so the controlling a stage process belongs to the project manager, right? The project board does not manage it day to day. So option A is incorrect. Option C says to analyze the project work before committing to initiation. Now that sounds like starting up a project process, right? So we can eliminate option C. Option D says to update the project initiation documentation at each stage. Now the PID or the project initiation documentation is updated as part of the project management activity, okay? Not as part of the directing a project process. So option D is also incorrect. So the correct answer is option B, which says to retain accountability of the project board while delegating detailed day-to-day project management, because the project board stays accountable and makes the key decisions. That way, the project manager handles the day-to-day detailing of the project, and that is managed by exception working in practice within a PRINCE2 project. So the correct answer is option B. Right, so let's move on. Question number 41. This should be an easy one. How many practices does PRINCE2 7th edition define? Of course, the correct answer is option C, which says 7, because the PRINCE2 7th edition framework exactly defines 7 practices, which are business case, organization, plans, quality, risk, issues, and progress. Each practice covers a specific aspect of good project management. I have an entire video on my YouTube channel on this topic, which deep dives into each of these practices within the PRINCE2 7th edition. So please make sure you watch that video as well. So the correct answer is option C. Moving on, what is the PRINCE2 definition of an outcome? Now here we are again on the output, outcome, benefit chain of PRINCE2, right? Now this time the question is asking about the outcome. Now let's look at the options one by one. Option A says measurable improvement resulting from a change. Now that is closer to the definition of a benefit, okay, not an outcome. A benefit is measurable and perceived as positive, okay? An outcome does not have to be positive, okay? It can be positive, can be negative as well, okay? So option A is incorrect. Option C says a tangible or intangible deliverable produced by an activity. Now that is the definition of an output. So option C is incorrect. Option D says an agreed set of work assigned to the team. Now that is describing a work package, okay? It has nothing to do with the outcome definition. So option D is incorrect. Option B says the result of a change that affects real world behavior and circumstances. And that is the correct answer choice. An outcome is what changes in the real world as a result of using the project's outputs, okay? And outcomes can be positive or negative, because negative outcomes within PRINCE2 are called disbenefits, okay? So please go back to your manual and study this chain of output, outcome, and benefit within a PRINCE2 project. It's a very important concept for you to master if you are preparing for the PRINCE2 certification exam. So the correct answer is option B. Next, question number 43. Who approves the project initiation documentation in PRINCE2? Now, the project initiation documentation is a very important management product within PRINCE2. It is often described as the contract between the project manager and the project board for delivering the project. Now the $1,000,000 question is, who approves it? Option A says the project manager, which is like a self-fulfilling prophecy, right? Because the project manager can't self-approve a project himself or herself, okay? So that is why option A obviously is incorrect answer choice. Option B says the senior user. Now the senior user is a member of the project board, but the approval is a collective decision of the board, okay? Not a single member acting alone. So option B is partially correct, but not precise. So that is why it's incorrect. Let's move on. Option D says project assurance. Now project assurance monitors and advises and in a way consults the project board. Okay, it does not have approval authority over management products. So option D is incorrect as well. Let's look at option C, which is the project board, and that is the obviously correct answer choice, because the project board approves the project initiation documentation during the directing a project process at the start of the project. Okay, this approval formally authorizes the project manager to proceed beyond the initiation stage of the project. So the correct answer is option C. Moving on, what is the purpose of the risk practice in PRINCE2? Now let's look at the options one by one. Option A says to guarantee that all risks are eliminated. Okay, now that's quite superlative, right? Really, all risks are eliminated. Now, no risk practice in reality can guarantee elimination of all the risks, right? So that is simply not realistic. So that is why option A is incorrect. Option C says to record all issues that have occurred. Again, superlative of all the issues. Again, quite not realistic as well. Okay, and if you think about it, even remotely, if you try to link this option to the issues practice of PRINCE2, it is not feasible to record all the issues that have occurred or sort of will occur within a project. Okay, so that is why it's not really the purpose of the risk practice for sure. So option C is a incorrect answer choice. I hope none of you have selected option C. Let's look at option D, which says to track the quality of products. Now that is the purpose of the quality practice, right? It has no linkage to the risk management. So option D is an incorrect answer choice. Now option B says to identify, assess and control uncertainty that may affect the project objectives. Now this looks like a quite good balanced option to me, because the risk practice is all about managing uncertainty proactively, right? And please note that this will include both threats and opportunities as well. Okay, because in PRINCE2, opportunities are treated as positive risks. Okay, so the correct answer is option B. Moving on, what is a disbenefit in PRINCE2? Now, this concept of disbenefits is something that often catches candidates off guard. Okay, so let's go through this carefully. Now, option A says a cost overrun exceeding the approved budget. Now, a cost overrun is a performance deviation against the cost tolerance, right? It is not the same as disbenefit in PRINCE2 terminology. So option A is incorrect. Let's look at option C, which says a risk that has materialized negatively. Now, a risk that has already materialized becomes an issue, right? Now, that is not same as disbenefit. So option C is incorrect as well. Now option D says an anticipated benefit that was not realized. Now that is a missed benefit and not a disbenefit. Okay, very important. Now a disbenefit is something that is actively negative, not just a failure to realize something which could have been positive. Okay, so option D is quite close, but it's an incorrect answer choice. And the correct answer to this question is option B, which is an outcome perceived as negative by one or more stakeholders. Okay, a disbenefit is really, if you think about it, opposite of a benefit. So for example, a new automated system that reduces staff workload might also result in job losses, right? Now, the member of staff who are affected by that job loss event can perceive that outcome as a disbenefit. Okay, so PRINCE2 requires these to be identified and managed properly. So the correct answer is option B. Right, so let's move on. Question number 46. What is the primary purpose of the project product description in PRINCE2? So in this question, we are having a management product knowledge question, right? Now, the project product description is different from the individual product descriptions. Okay, now that is quite a distinction which you need to understand as a PRINCE2 exam candidate. Now let's look at the options. Option A says to list all of the individual products that will be delivered. Now listing all products is done in the product register or the product breakdown structure, right? Not in the project product description. So option A is incorrect. Let's look at option C, which says to record quality results from testing. Now that is the purpose of the quality register. So option C is incorrect. let's look at option D, which says to document how the project management team will be organized. Now that relates to the organization practice deliverables such as the project management team structure and the role descriptions. So we can eliminate option D as well. Now option B says to describe the overall project product, its purpose, composition, and acceptance criteria. Now this is the correct answer choice. The project product description defines the main deliverable of the entire project, what it should look like, and how the customer will judge whether to accept it or not. So the correct answer is option B. Moving on, who is responsible for producing the exception report in PRINCE2? Now, it's a very clear-cut roles question, right? Who produces the exception report? Now, we have done it multiple times now as part of this entire exercise, and we all know that option C is the correct answer choice. Okay, because when stage tolerances are forecast to be breached, the project manager is the one who raises the exception report to the project board, plain and simple. So the correct answer is option C. I'm not even discussing option A, B, and D because I hope if you are with me till now as part of this entire exercise, you know for sure that why option A, B, and D are incorrect answer choices. So the correct answer to this question is option C. So let's move on. Question number 48, and here we are on the focus on products principle. Now the question is testing the application of it, right? Not just a recognition. So let's look at the option one by one. Option A says to ensure every product meets quality before the next stage plan is approved. Now this is about quality control, not specifically the focus on product principle, right? So option A is not the best fit. So it's an incorrect answer choice. Let's look at option C, which says focus on delivering highest priority products first. Now, prioritization is more associated with agile thinking. Okay. Now, the focus on products principle is about product based planning and not about delivery prioritization. So, option C is incorrect. Option D says ensure all products are documented in the quality management approach. Now, products are documented in the product descriptions and the product register, not specifically the quality management approach, right? So option D is incorrect. So the correct answer is option B, which says define and agree on the products to be delivered before planning the activities to create them. Now, the principle of focus on products requires teams to define the what before the how, right? So you describe the products first and then you plan how to create them. So the products lead and the activities follow after them. Okay, so the correct answer is option B. Right, so the next question, what does the tailor to suit the project principle allow an organization to do? Okay. Now, this overall concept of the tailoring to suit the project principle is often misunderstood within the PRINCE2 candidate pool. Okay, because tailoring does not really mean that we are ignoring PRINCE2. Okay, let's be very clear about that. So let's look at the option one by one. Option A says ignore principles if not relevant. Now, this might seem tempting, guys. Okay, but the 7 principles are non-negotiable. All the 7 must always be applied. Okay, plain and simple. You cannot ignore any of them. So we eliminate option A. Option C says replace PRINCE2 processes with alternative methods. Now, tailoring can adjust how processes are applied, but the wholesale replacement is not what this principle actually means. Okay, so option C is incorrect. Option D says remove management products to reduce administration. Now, products can be simplified or combined within tailoring, but simply removing them without proper justification is not what tailoring is about. So option D is incorrect. So the correct answer is option B, which says to adapt how PRINCE2 is applied to suit the project's context and scale. Because if you think about it, a large-scale infrastructure program would apply PRINCE2 quite differently from a small internal IT upgrade, okay? And that is tailoring in action. Okay. However, please note that tailoring does not mean we are ignoring PRINCE2. We are just sort of tweaking the overall framework of PRINCE2 to match the project complexity and the project scale. So the correct answer is option B. Let's move on. Question number 50. Now, this is a question regarding the team manager role as part of the overall PRINCE2 delivery. And let's look at the options one by one. So option A says to represent supplier interests on the project board. Now that is plain and simple the senior supplier role. And option A, that's the reason, is an incorrect answer choice. Option C says to provide administrative support. That is the role of project support, not the team manager. Again, an incorrect answer choice. Option D says to assure the project board that delivery is on track. Now that is project assurance. The team manager reports to the project manager, okay, not directly to the project board. So option D is incorrect as well. Now option B, which is the correct answer choice, says to manage the delivery of products on behalf of the project manager within agreed tolerances. Okay, because the team manager receives the work packages from the project manager and manages the team to deliver the products in them. Okay, so think of it as a frontline delivery manager of the project. Okay, so the correct answer is option B. Let's move on. Question number 51. And this is a technique question on the organizational design and development technique. Now, the technique has 4 steps: understand, design, develop, and transition. And the question is about induction session for a new team member. Now, option A says understand the organizational ecosystem. Now, this step is about analyzing the current environment and what the project needs. It happens early and does not involve onboarding individuals. So option A is incorrect. Let's look at option B, which says design the project ecosystem. And this is where the project management team structure and role descriptions are designed. It's a planning activity, not a people development activity. So option B is incorrect. Option D says transition the project into organizational ecosystem. Now this step is about moving the outputs into the operational use at the end of the project to realize the benefits, right? An induction session is really, if you think about it, not the part of this. So we can eliminate option D as well. So option C says develop the project ecosystem, and this is the correct answer choice. The develop step is where the people are actually brought into the team, inducted, trained, and supported. Okay, it's about building the team's capability and relationships. So the correct answer is option C. Let's move on. Question number 52. And this is a knowledge question about the business case practice. Now, PRINCE2 uses 3 specific terms to assess continued business justification. Now, if you go to the PRINCE2 manual, the directive within the manual is very plain and simple and very direct as well, because PRINCE2 wants you to assess whether a project remained justified by being desirable, viable, and achievable. Okay, because the project, if you think about it, must be desirable to the business, viable as an investment, and achievable given the available capabilities. Okay, and this assessment continues throughout the project. So the correct answer to this question is option B. If you look at the other options, let's say option A, which is feasible and affordable, option C, realistic and valuable. Now these are very sort of loose terms and does not reflect the true PRINCE2 terminology as defined in the manual. And it's very important for you to understand as an exam candidate that you as the exam candidate has to be very, very sacrosanct about what the manual terms, a concept or a product, or let's say an overall offering of PRINCE2, because these terms and terminologies within the PRINCE2 manual are very sacrosanct and they can't be used interchangeably. So that's why the correct answer to this question is option B. Next, question number 53. What is the purpose of setting risk tolerance in PRINCE2? Now, this is a nuanced question about how tolerances work for risk in PRINCE2. Now, risk tolerance is part of the broader tolerances framework in the overall PRINCE2 method. Let's look at the options one by one. Option A says to define the maximum budget for risk responses. Now, there is a concept called risk budget, right? But risk tolerance is not specifically about the budget for the responses. So option A is not quite right. Option C says to identify which risks should be accepted or avoided. Now, risk response selection is a separate activity in the risk management technique. Risk tolerance is not about choosing the responses. So option C is incorrect. Let's look at option D, which says to prioritize risks based on likelihood. Prioritization of risks uses probability and impact assessment, right? Now, risk tolerance is quite different from this. So that's why option D is also quite extraneous and we can eliminate it straight away. So option B says to establish the level of risk exposure that is acceptable before escalation to the next management level is required. And this is the correct answer choice. Risk tolerance defines this boundary exactly, okay? If the overall risk exposure of the project exceeds the agreed tolerance, it must be escalated in PRINCE2. And this is managed by exception applied to the risk practice. So the correct answer is option B. Let's move on. Question number 54. Which statement correctly describes the planning responsibilities of the team manager in PRINCE2? Okay, so now we have a planning responsibilities question. Okay, now let's be very precise about who creates which type of plan in PRINCE2. Now option A says the team manager creates stage plans and the project manager creates the team plans. Now that is quite incorrect and it's actually the other way around, okay? Because the project manager creates the stage plans and the team managers creates the team plans, okay? So we can eliminate option A. Option C says team manager produces exception plans, okay? Again, an incorrect answer choice because exception plans are produced by the project manager, not the team manager. Let's look at option D, which says the team manager approves the stage plans and the project manager approves the team's plans, okay? Now, neither of these are correct, okay? Approval of stage and exception plans, both of them sits with the project board. So option D is incorrect. So option B says the team manager produces the team plans, correct, and the project manager produces the stage plans and the project plan, which is also correct. So team plans, if you think about it and if you go back to your manual and study the overall concept of team plans within PRINCE2, those are optional, okay? However, if at all it needs to be produced, they are produced by the team manager for internal team management, okay? The project manager is responsible for the stage plan, which mind you is not optional, it's mandatory, and the stage plan adds up to the overall project plan. So the correct answer is option B. Let's move on. Which of the following is an objective of initiating a project process? Okay, now this is a process objectives question, and the initiating a project process is about setting the foundations for the project. It answers the key questions such as why we are doing it, what has been done, how we are going to do it, who would be doing it, when will things get done, and how much will it cost, let's say. Okay, so let's look at the options one by one. Now option A says to assess whether the project is viable before committing to full planning. Now that sounds more like the purpose of starting up a project process, right? Because initiating a project comes after that decision has been made. So option A is incorrect. Let's look at option C, which says to ensure the project board knows how many stages are required. Now, while this is covered during the initiation, it is not specifically one of the defined objectives of the initiating a project process as within the manual, okay? And as I have mentioned this before, that whatever has been mentioned in the manual is very, very sacrosanct within PRINCE2 and you have to abide by it whilst answering the questions. So option C is not quite right. Let's look at option D, which says to formally authorize the project manager to manage the project. Now, this is an activity in directing a project process and not an objective for initiating a project. So we can eliminate option D as well. Now, option B says to understand how changes to the agreed project products will be approved. Now, this looks like a good option to me, and it is the correct answer choice indeed. And this is the defined objective of initiating a project process, okay? At least one of the objectives, okay? It ensures change control is planned before the project baseline is set. And along those lines, the correct answer to this question is option B. Let's move on. So the project manager identifies a risk that could affect the delivery schedule for the next stage, but not really the current one. How should the risk be recorded and managed? Okay. Now here we have a scenario based question about risk recording. Now the key here is that there is still an uncertain event that may or may not occur, right? Now it may affect the next stage, but it's not really certain, right? So what do you do with it? Now option A says that it should be updated in the issue register because it is certain to affect the project. Now that is incorrect, right? As we have discussed, because the question says that this is a risk, okay, and not an event, okay? And risks are uncertain, issues are certain events, okay? And this is uncertain. So that is why option A is incorrect. Let's look at option C, which says that it should be updated in the lessons log. Now the lessons log is for capturing lessons identified during the project and not for recording active risks. So option C is incorrect as well. Let's look at option D, which talks about highlight reports. It recommends to be highlighted immediately as an escalation. Now, this might seem proactive, but a highlight report is a regular status update. Okay, it is a time-based product or a time-based management product or a project artifact, not a event-based. Okay, so there is no event per se that triggers updating of a highlight report. You do it, let's say, every month or every 5th of the month, like that. Okay, so it's a time-based control, not a event-based control. Okay, so you would not normally escalate a risk that does not currently breach any tolerance without recording it properly first, right? So that is why option D is an incorrect answer choice. So the correct answer is option B, which says that it should be updated in the risk register with probability, impact, and response details. Okay, and it's a very, very comprehensive answer choice because risk register is exactly where you record identified risks. So the correct answer is option B. Moving on, what is the purpose of the communication management approach in PRINCE2? Okay, now this is a management product purpose question. The communication management approach is often confused with stakeholder management. Okay, so let's clear this up as part of this question. Now, option A says to define the strategy for identifying and managing stakeholders. Now, stakeholder identification and engagement is part of what the communication management approach addresses, okay? But defining the stakeholder strategy alone is not its full purpose, okay? So option A is incomplete, and that is why it's also an incorrect answer choice. Option C says to document lessons and how they will be shared. Now, that's totally extraneous because that's the purpose of lessons log, okay, not the communication management approach. So that's why option C is incorrect. Let's look at option D, which says to describe how changes to management products will be communicated. Now that relates more to the change management approach, so we can eliminate option D as well. Now finally, option B says to establish how information will be communicated across the project ecosystem and to external stakeholders. Now this is the correct answer choice. The communication management approach describes the means, the frequency, and the format of information flow throughout the project. It keeps everyone informed at the right level. So the correct answer is option B. Let's move on. How does PRINCE2 7th edition incorporate sustainability into project management? Now, sustainability is one of the key additions in the PRINCE2 7th edition when compared to the PRINCE2 6th edition. Okay, now let's look through the options one by one. Option A says by requiring all projects to achieve net zero carbon emissions. Now, really, that's too futuristic, right? Because PRINCE2 does not mandate specific environmental outcomes like net zero for all projects, okay? Because that may not be realistic, okay? And it would be far too prescriptive. So that is why option A is incorrect. Option C says by requiring a dedicated sustainability manager on every project board. Now, PRINCE2 does not mandate specific roles beyond the core project board roles, which are the executive, the senior user, and the senior supplier. Tailoring allows organizations to add roles, but this is not a PRINCE2 requirement, okay, per se. So that's why option C is incorrect. Option D says by mandating environmental certification for all suppliers. Now, PRINCE2 does not mandate supplier certifications, okay? Let's be very clear on this. That would be totally out of the scope of the overall project management framework within PRINCE2, and that is why option D is incorrect. Option B says by including sustainability as one of the 7 performance targets against which tolerances are set. Now that's the correct answer choice, and this is exactly how PRINCE2 7th edition embeds sustainability. It sits alongside time, cost, quality, scope, benefits, and risk as the performance target. Tolerances are set for it, and it is managed throughout the project. So the correct answer is option B. Moving on, question number 59. Which of the following correctly describes the role of project support in PRINCE2? Now in PRINCE2, project support is often confused with project assurance, okay? So let's make this clear as part of this sample question that we are going to solve. So option A says an independent role that assures the project board the project is being managed correctly. Now that is the definition of project assurance, not project support. They are completely different roles with different reporting lines. So option A is incorrect. Option B says a role that manages day-to-day delivery of work packages. Now that describes the team manager. Okay. Project support does not manage delivery. Okay, so we can eliminate option B straight away. Option D says a role responsible for approving changes for the project baseline. Now, approval of changes belongs to the project board or whoever is delegated that authority within the change management approach. Now, project support does not approve changes really. Okay, so option D is incorrect. Option C says an administrative function that provides support services to the project manager and the project management team, and that's the correct answer choice. Project support provides administrative assistance such as maintaining registers, filing management products, supporting configuration management, creating purchase orders. Let's say that's a very common use case for project support officers, taking minutes of meetings and those kind of stuff. Okay, it serves the project management team. So the correct answer is option C. The final question, guys, which of the following correctly describes when the managing a stage boundary process is used in PRINCE2? Okay, now this is a process application question, and the managing a stage boundary process is an important one, and its scope is sometimes quite misunderstood within the PRINCE2 candidates. So let's look at the options one by one. Option A says at the end of every stage, including the final stage. Now, well, that doesn't really make sense at all, right? The final stage of a project closes using the closing out a project process, okay? Not managing a stage boundary. So option A is incorrect. Option B says only when the project is an exception. Now, exception plans do use this process, but managing a stage boundary is not limited only to exception situations, right? So option B is not really the complete picture. So that's why it's an incorrect answer choice. Option D says only for large projects with more than 5 management stages. Really? Now, if you know about it for sure, I hope that PRINCE2 does not restrict this process to large projects, right? Any project with more than one stage uses managing a stage boundary. Okay, so we can eliminate option D straight away. Option C says at the end of all management stages except the final stage. Now this is the correct answer choice. Managing a stage boundary is used between stages to plan the next stage and gain project board authorization to proceed. The final stage uses closing a project process instead. So the correct answer to this question is option C.
Right, so that's the end of the full 60 question set as part of your PRINCE2 Foundation exam. If you have solved all the questions and you are still with me at this point in the video, please drop a comment saying I solved the full 60 questions in the comment section below. It would be very interesting to see how many of you did really manage to solve the full question set, regardless what your score is, because here we are actually checking that whether you have that patience enough to sit through the 60 questions. And of course, kudos to you if you have done that, because trust me, very few PRINCE2 exam aspirants show that kind of sincerity. And if you have sat through this full 60 question set, you are already a step ahead of your peers for your PRINCE2 exam preparation. Thank you for watching, and I will see you again in the next video.